What does solidarity actually demand of us? In moments of crisis, it's easy to mistake awareness for action or outrage for commitment. But the history of Black internationalism and the Palestinian liberation struggle points towards something much deeper: relationships built over time, a willingness to confront injustice, genocide, settler colonialism whenever it appears. In this episode, we sit down with Palestinian organizer Noura and Black abolitionist organizer F12 to explore what happens when solidarity moves beyond symbolism. Together, we trace their political journeys from incarceration and prison and organizing inside to the occupied West Bank, and reflect on the lessons that both of them have learned, that reflect on lessons that both of them have carried home from years of organizing alongside Palestinian communities. Our conversation examines the realities of settler colonialism, protective presence in Palestine, Black Palestinian solidarity, and the work-building movements that can endure repression without losing their humanity. As F12 puts it in this interview, solidarity has to have teeth. It has to involve risk, it has to involve commitment, and it takes time beyond the romanticism of how we view other people and their histories. We also discuss some of the deeper political transformation that happens once you return home. How do we apply the lessons of Palestine to our own neighborhoods, movements, and relationships? How do we resist turning solidarity into another form of romanticism? And as one reflection from the conversation reminds us, the deeper work starts when you come back. I hope everyone settles into this conversation. As I mentioned at the end of it, it's probably one of my favorite interviews because I love cross-cultural conversations. I love conversations from comrades that have met each other in interesting ways. And I just believe that the work that the folks in this interview have done is really amazing. So please check out the show notes in the description to support their work, and stay tuned for more episodes in season 3 of The Dugout. And as always, check out our Patreon to support the work that we do. Enjoy the interview.
Hello and welcome to the Dugout. Very glad to have you all both in this space today. Can you guys introduce yourselves?
Hi, everyone. My name is Noura. I am based here in Oakland, California. Glad to be here.
Hi, everyone. I go by F12, they, them. I'm based in Sacramento, and glad to be here.
The next question we love to ask, and you can share as much or as little as you want, but what was a young you like?
Young me. Well, I mean, young me was totally different. I was incarcerated for 14 years. I got out like 3 years ago. So like the younger version of me was, not really like political, just like, kind of a troublemaker. But, during the course of my incarceration was where I, got like really like politicized. I sort of like by chance happened to read a copy of Blood in My Eye by George Jackson. And that was like, really like life changing for me. And, I remember just late nights, like 2 a.m. after the, COs would do their walk is when I would be on the phone all night with, with the sheets up. I remember like after I discovered it, I was just like astonished, and I would just be, under the blankets, like reading this little PDF copy. It was really amazing to see, somebody writing from this perspective of this experience that I was sharing, and to see somebody put words to the incarcerated struggle. And so this young version of me in my 20s, like it really like shifted the perspective that I had on the world. It allowed me to see the way that I was, the context of my own oppression, and it gave me words to that. And so like shifting from this young person that was just into like gangs and drugs and all that, et cetera, et cetera. Like it was like almost like an immediate shift. And so like looking back, that is one like thing that I am grateful for, that to be able to like, have that shift and become politicized, and it really shaped me into the person that I am now.
One follow-up question is like, have you read that text like since then, or like numerous times? Has your perspective on it changed?
Yeah, I find myself pretty much like every day referencing something, going back to it. Like I've read it just like numerous times, and it hardened my analysis, like to where like it's sort of like the lens that I see everything else from. It really like shaped me as a abolitionist first. I've gone through different like iterations, like political iterations of in my development. Like I kind of started out a little bit into the whole Democratic Party thing, and that was like pretty brief. Like I kind of like immediately saw like, okay, this is not working. This doesn't make sense. And then from there, I got into like socialism, and I was I with another comrade, we started the Sacramento chapter of the Communist Party here, and did that for like a couple years. And then I quickly saw like I really had this sort of conflict with the hierarchy. The people were cool, but like I saw the way that hierarchy was operating, it didn't like vibe with who I was and how I saw things. So, and then in addition to that, which is probably like a whole different conversation, like at this time there was a literal like coup that happened in the party with ACP. I don't know if you heard of the American Communist Party. They had this little coup, and but I had left the party by then, and then from there was I was part of like incarcerated workers organizing committee and IWW. Just like how my politics started to shift. It was like around like more decentralized organizing, like non-hierarchical stuff, and I was with the AAPRP for a little bit, and so just in this like short like 3 years that I've been decarcerated, like it was like a political speed run, and I found myself like immediately like, okay, with all the ways that I was viewing myself in the world politically, it was how I developed into having more like anarchist like perspective, and then reading things like anarcho-Blackness, and sort of like discovering like Black anarchism, based on like some of the ways that the city that I grew up in, how a lot of like anarchist things were manifested in sort of like this white anarchist thing. Like it was just kind of like since it was all new to me, I was like immediately seeing like these things, and I was like, so when I discovered like Black anarchism, I was like, oh, okay, this works, and then from there got deeper into Afro-pessimism, and that's kind of like where I'm at now.
I was born in Michigan, where my parents fled after the 67 war in Palestine. And so we were like immigrants, or they were immigrants. And so, yeah, then we moved to the Bay and when I was 6, so I was pretty young. And yeah, I just remember being kind of like very independent and sort of, just a little bit outside the box in terms of like um, trying to fit into the mold of, culturally, yeah, just having that diaspora experience. But then growing up, I was very depoliticized. I knew my family story and history, but I didn't have the context. Like, when I went to college at San Francisco State, it was kind of the peak of the free speech movement, like the benefits that we got of the ethnic studies struggle that happened in the 60s. So I studied international relations, and they taught us the truth about what was happening like globally. I mean, I knew my family story, but I could not believe that US and, the empire was doing the same things in Latin America, Africa, Asia, and the Arab world. And it sort of blew my mind. But then, it was the 90s and the internet was blowing up and, the .com, it was kind of the peak of capitalism. There was so much money in the air. Like people are literally throwing, money at you just in terms of opportunities were so ripe. Anyways, I kind of thought in the back of my mind, like, there's no way they're going to get away with these coups and like all their, CIA tricks and stuff that they've been doing in the past anymore, because the world will be able to see what they're up to. And they can't get away with it. Once the world knows what they're doing, they're going to stop them. And then, 9/11 happened and, I kind of like dropped everything I was doing and said like, I want to be the change, let me be the change I want to see in the world kind of thing. And so I haven't looked back since, and I went to Palestine my first time in 2003 to do nonviolent direct action. And yeah, I just been on that path. It's been a rocky road and really, just so much learning and trying to make sense and and have some understanding of like what is really going on. So I'm really excited to talk more about that from that point of view, because it's been a long journey.
You said when you were younger, you felt kind of depoliticized in a lot of ways, and like a lot of the experiences you just described kind of shifted that. Like, is that kind of because of your familial trauma and your parents trying to kind of survive and make sense of things and to build what they could from what they had? Or I don't know, I'm
You mean the depoliticization part?
yeah. Because like I'm thinking a lot of like my family immigrating to the U.S. and of course a different context, but like the survival process, the assimilation process, or whatever one might describe it as. But yeah, just curious.
No, I think that's very similar in most immigrant communities where, people want to like come for opportunities. So of course they want to kind of keep their head down and not, rock the boat too much, because oftentimes they're fleeing from political persecution and know what's at stake. And especially if you have families and, the more you have, the more you have to protect. And the harder it is to really, like be aligned with your values necessarily if you have opinions that are unpopular or whatever. So um it's been a very hard process to decouple that like from my family of origin, and like I'm kind of like the black sheep where it's people are like, oh, just find peace within and just love yourself and there'll be peace in the world. um, and it's just like, that is a very Bay Area mindset of like this individualism and spirituality that's kind of like a form of bypassing, spiritual bypassing or whatever. Um, I'm like, you can't meditate on a mountaintop while the world is burning. And they're like, actually, if you can, that would be pretty amazing. And I'm like, that's so selfish. But there's really a strong influence of that kind of culture in especially in the Bay Area. It's just like, people come here to heal their trauma, and I get it. Like, I think it's very real, that PTSD. I didn't even know that I had it because I did grow up in a very privileged sort of middle class lifestyle until my father passed when I was 12 years old. And my mom raised us as a single mom. And, I kind of had to fend for myself. And, having that struggle, I think it really shaped who I was. But, it caused her and the rest of my family to just go on this like personal journey that was far more like aligned with that spiritual perspective rather than the political, because I think the trauma of everything that everyone had been through was like it did need to be healed, but I think the point is that it doesn't need to happen in a vacuum, that it can happen simultaneously, and it really needs to and should like be a parallel process. And on the other side, like I work within a lot of leftist groups that are just very much like dialectical materialists, only that which you can see, hear, smell, and touch, which I find is very limited in terms of like, but I understand because, that's what the state uses to, separate us by religion, by race. And so, by taking, like a principled position of, position, like, Marxist position, for example, or dialectics, then, everything that we're experiencing sort of speaks for itself, but it's like it doesn't address the relationships and the trauma and the inter, interrelation, like the relationships that go south, in terms of our movement spaces. And then we don't have that kind of connective tissue to keep us like grounded and connected when issues arise. And so like the trauma kicks in and takes over. And so yeah, I've found very few spaces that really have both of those values, and like value the importance of both the spiritual and the political. So I'm always searching for that yeah, like common thread and community.
I feel like that common thread, like in looking for security and like describing like how people find the certain philosophical, political, and like guiding paths in their life, and like what they think is going to get them to security for themselves and those they care about. Like you were saying, like even in a lot of leftist spaces, like to me, it's still like I have faith in us being able to build something to have more secure options later on. That to me is what keeps me in to a lot of organizing, is like I do see like potential realizing itself and like people realizing their own potentials, but also I see so much more that could be available. So I'm curious, like what kind of brought y'all into like a deeper organizing practice or engaging in politics in like a lifelong, a very like intentional kind of way.
I think it started, during my carceral experience, like towards the end, because over the course of like 14 years, like I would say for at least over half of it, the first half, like I thought I would be like doing that forever, like involved in that lifestyle forever. And so, when I sort of like had that shift, that was what like started my like organizing, and really shaped the context of my resistance. And I think that like element of being able to recognize prisons, and just the carceral institution as sort of the most like the epitome of like state violence. The ways that incarcerated people like resist that, like can kind of go like unnoticed. A lot of times it's like invisible. It made me like obviously like better, but like I really got into a lot more trouble, just like a different kind of trouble, because now I'm like, more like educated and sharper. And it really like made me more of a problem for the institution, and for the correctional officers. Like, they hated me because like I was always like on them, like about our all of our rights, the things that we were supposed to be getting, the bullshit that they were up to. And I was always filing like little things, and doing 602s, and so have this like build a skill of like organizing with other incarcerated people to get what we were supposed to have, and being able to like do that across racial boundaries and all that. Like it built the skill that, you know, I would utilize later when I got out. But it was something that like really, you know, like sharpened my analysis now. How I view, you know, organizing is like, it really comes from that experience. And I think it's something that definitely like shaped me a lot.
Yeah, I guess I kind of shared like how I got into organizing. Some people ask me like, I don't know how you can do what you do, and I respond like, I can't imagine not doing and just like taking it in all day. Like, if you are like a semi-conscious person and you're just witnessing all the violence and injustice that's taking place, like, I'm sensitive. Like, I can't just receive and not like have a response. Like, and I think over the years, I've learned how to be a little bit less reactive and more proactive and trying to really get to and understand the root causes of, where we're at and why we're here. And I think that has been a long journey to like really unravel, especially, deal with all my trauma and really learn how to find the balance to sustain for the long term because we've seen so many people come in and out of the movement, mostly leave, and then they never come back after they got injured and or hurt by getting their feelings hurt or whatever. Like you have to have really thick skin in a way and really like do that self work so that you're not going to burn out at both ends. Because like I often say, I can fight the enemy all day and I'm kind of good at it and I kind of get off on it like I'm enjoy it. But like when we fight ourselves and each other, like that's what utterly breaks my heart and demobilizes me like energetically and makes me really like question everything in really deep and sad ways. Yeah, but I think the work itself fuels me and really just seeing like the progression of like, for example, we never dreamt we would have the level of support and solidarity that we do for Palestine that we've had over the past 3 years. And yeah, just trying to find ways to channel that energy and make it sustainable is something like of a challenge. And I really enjoy the thinking strategically, which is something that I think, I think can be done best like within collectives, but the community organizing is the hardest thing. It's like, because we're all like have our trauma and, especially with people of color, I feel like that's why it ends up being mostly white people and older people, because, and all those groups are always wondering like, where are the young people? Where are the people of color? And I feel like it's often because we're just struggling to survive and keep afloat, like financially, emotionally, spiritually, all of those things on a day-to-day is hard enough. And yeah, just like not having kids, or a mortgage, I think also helps. I always say we lose the best of them to kids and the mortgage because, like I said, the more you have, the more you have to lose. And it's just really hard, to survive out here.
Yeah, I really resonate with what you're saying because for the past like 7 years, mostly, I've organized in this collective for Black LGBTQIA folks, and I kind of joke like everyone's too traumatized to organize or to like show up to meetings. And I don't know. I mean, sometimes I say that kind of bitterly, but it's like the part of my brain that wonders why am I one of the people that tries to show up in the way that I do versus all of the things that other people are dealing with and struggling through and working through. And I don't know, it's like a big thing that's on my mind a lot.
I also noticed that like half of our, strongest like people that stay on for the long term are often queer too. For some reason, it seems to be a truth because like we're used to fighting and struggling and, like surviving or like overcoming. And it's like you don't let the first thing, stop you, like on the path to freedom. Like you can't just, it reminds me of Palestinians. Like if they can't go on one road, they find another way around. Like they don't just give up, and yeah, if it fuels your soul to be doing this work, like you're not going to let anyone stop you, right? Like, but I think, yeah, it is the hardest thing in the world to work in groups, and it's easier to work alone. But yeah, that's the conundrum. And I think the contradictions that are really challenging, I think, to overcome, especially because we don't build in healing spaces into our organizing spaces. So it just ends up being like, okay, go to therapy and deal with your shit and then come back when you're ready. But it's like, yeah, how can we find ways to integrate some of that healing practice within our movements to keep it sustainable on the long term? I think is important.
Yeah, I think that's an important part. We just did an episode on Star, like Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivero and the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries. And they were doing a lot of organizing with like inside of prisons that there'd be constantly in and out of just for being visibly queer. And like their biggest thing was we just need to get people out and raise money to get people out. And it just reminded me always of like that the queer spirit and the queer continual struggle to have to fight for ourselves in every group and also be serious about trying to heal with each other against the common enemy. Like we're gonna make ourselves known in a space, but we also are not there to just take the whole space down. Like if things need to change, they need to change, but we're still struggling against something, and that's why we're here in the first place. And if we need to heal together as much as we need to struggle together, that care work is an extreme priority.
Right? Not just like the individualized care, which I think is, yeah, the important like distinction.
So how did y'all first start getting involved with the Palestinian liberation movement? How does that struggle materialize for y'all as over the years?
I, got deeply involved like October 7th. I had barely been out a year. And so, I was already organizing with incarcerated workers organizing committee and doing stuff, related to that. When that happened, it sort of, like represented to me like something that like I just felt deeply like connected to based on like my experiences. And to see this group of people, like really fight back and really, put a put a boot in the empire's ass like that, like I was just like, hell yeah. And so that was how I got deep into it. I think a lot of people obviously like from that moment we saw a huge shift in a lot of people coming to organizing spaces. So for me it was being in proximity to a lot of people that had like never organized before or didn't like have some of the experiences that that I had. I think that like it really pointed to like a lot of the sort of like the differences in communities and people I think that's one thing that when we talked about like like queer communities, like one of my experiences like from the trans community in prison, like that was my first like seeing the resilience that was in that community. And that's one thing that I feel like was represented, like the resilience that that y'all were talking about, seeing that, like if one thing doesn't work you find another way. Just for me, like a lot of the figures in Palestinian resistance, like I really like would study on, and one of them was like Abu Ali Mustafa, and seeing like so I remember like when we would do like teach-ins, that was one of the figures that I would like research and talk about a lot. and because he represented somebody to me that was like just a huge figure in the movement, and starting to like make connections and meet people, and I really saw this reflection of from the incarcerated struggle and the black struggle. Like I saw this like mirrored reflection, and it really I recall like while I was locked up, I had read this book, and this was at a time like I didn't really know a lot about the context of what was happening, but I read it, and it was about Palestinian political prisoners and how they would like lock up children. And I had this book, and I remember during a cell search, one of the correctional officers he took it and I remember asking my cellmate, who was older at the time, why were they tripping off this book? Because they really like limited us from having like a lot of like political materials. That was one of the reasons why we couldn't get like copies of like Blood in My Eye, because they didn't want us reading anything like that. And so when they took this book, and I cannot remember the name of it, but it really was telling a lot about what was going on. And like I had it for like 3 days, and after the cell search, they took it, and I was like, and my cellmate, who was older, he was like, yeah, they don't want us knowing about any of that. And so like years later, when October 7th happened, I recalled that. I was like, damn, like there's a reason why they don't want us connecting these struggles. And now learning everything about the Gilly program, and seeing the ways that they just the interconnectedness between the struggles, like we see why is something that like really like is deep for me, and I feel like just deeply connected to it. And so when like that's one of the ways that Nora and I got connected, was well, at the time we were sort of circling around the gubernatorial campaign, with around like Butch Ware, who was somebody that I had become acquainted to like a year prior to him running for governor. And through like some mutuals, we like met each other. And so when the opportunity to go to Palestine and do protective presence like came, it was like sort of like a no-brainer for me.
Yay. And they went in December, and we haven't looked back since. So grateful for meeting you and Bree, and just the work that we've done together. So proud of and excited about. From maybe like how I got involved with like Black solidarity, because I'm Palestinian, and I think from the other perspective, like I've always been a Palestine organizer, but for me, my political consciousness around like the connections between Black and Palestinian solidarity really like kind of crystallized in around 2011, when I found out about Urban Shield, which is like what the cops do is they brought the heads of police departments all over the country to Oakland to train them by the Israeli military in the Oakland Marriott. Like, and they had been doing that for 7 or 8 years once we got wind of it. So I kind of started that campaign, and it was the like most people were just okay. So they did these simulations. It was a counterterrorism project. So they gave them like $3 million for a weekend of exercises. They would do these checkpoint watches and terror simulations where they shoot up like entire cities and have civilians like playing.
Give me $3 million for a weekend. Just please, somebody give me $3 million for a weekend. Are you fucking I know. I was like, imagine we'd be able, just the four of us in this room, $3 million one
Oh my
weekend.
God.
What are we
Can you
getting done?
imagine?
Oh my God. Sorry.
Yeah,
That's
the
just
vast
wild.
amount of waste, the empire uses in this, militarism for, these nefarious things like they would take over the entire streets of Berkeley, Oakland, and San Francisco and just do like these live shooter scenarios and really just try to terrorize our communities. So it was the largest, it was like a nugget they handed us, a golden nugget, because it literally pissed everyone off. And like nobody knew it was happening for 8, 9 years that it was taking place. And they envisioned it to grow indefinitely. But it was like, we had teachers, we had librarians, we had all the usual, organizations out there, like protesting Urban Shield. It took us 8 years, but we finally got it canceled for good. First on the city level, and then it was on the county level. So it was like a multi-city project and effort. But it was like the perfect example of the ways that power organizes together and uses militarism to not just arm our communities but steal those resources, because those are like all from the war on terror, whatever, like the excess military gear that they didn't send to Iraq and stuff that they were trying to deploy on the streets of the US, and they're still working on getting that done. But we're just constantly trying to chip away at, taking those tools away from them so they could terrorize us more. But yeah, then, it was around that time that I learned that, like Malcolm X went to Palestine, and, Muhammad Ali, and like so many of our Black leaders were like, way more connected than I think we are or were on that level. I mean, I think it's evolved much more so now to an extent where people are starting to understand the connections and realize like how all the weapons, the tactics, the tools, and just policies that they enact over there always come back in this imperial boomerang to affect us here. And so I think that was, perfect example of how that works, and not just like, theoretical ways. And we're seeing that more and more now with ICE, and, like how the prison industrial complex is all, tied in, and the same contractors and surveillance machines that have been tested for decades in Palestine are now being refined and used here to surveil and target our communities once we start to speak out against all this violence. So it's just a natural, I think, evolution once you get deep enough in organizing in any issue, I would say. Like, then they all start to, you start to see more and more ways in which they're connected. It's like pieces of the puzzle, I think of it as. And once we put them together, we see the bigger picture. And so I think that's what we're seeing now with like the Epstein files, and, the ways that like he was connected to intelligence and surveillance, and Peter Thiel and JD Vance. Like now they're trying to take over our government. They're literally trying to privatize our government and use their wealth and power to like clamp down on anyone who dares to speak out or poke their head up against all this. And like, yeah, I think it's a very important step to make in order to like truly, if you want to fight, say you're fighting injustice, like you cannot look at, like, I feel like anyone who's serious about doing so needs to understand the ways in which everything is connected.
If I think about my like trajectory politically, like 2011, I was starting university and kind of beginning to understand the Black Lives Matter movement. And then my senior year was when there was another kind of just like wave of violence and the ongoing genocide. And like a lot of my senior year was around like Palestine and Black Lives Matter. And then like seeing people from Ferguson go over, and people like making those connections between the weaponry companies and surveillance. And then even from then to now, to see all of the changes and shifts in what people understand, how they understand it, how they react to like Zionism and colonial violence. And it's almost, I mean, it's terrifying, but at the same time, it's kind of like, okay, now that it's even more on display, I feel like the question or the demand of solidarity is there even more. And as y'all were talking earlier, I kept thinking about like the phrase of like how history lives in us and how we find it in small and big ways, like you reading Blood in My Eye. And that to me seems like such an experience of like, I don't know, being connected to this larger history and it being like actualized like moment by moment, or like 2011 and Urban Shield, and how it's important to pay attention to these moments when history is literally happening right in front of us, but also to realize that we're a part of this ongoing trajectory.
Oh my God. Yeah, I've been feeling that so intensely and trying to articulate it. I've been saying, like, yeah, like the past, present, and the future, I feel like are colliding in this moment and accelerating it to such an extent where it's like I feel it in my body. It's so intense, like the energy and just everything that's coming at us every single day, so fast and furious. And we're just trying to process and make sense of it all. Like, it's just, I think by design, it's overwhelming. And yeah, just in terms of like what we're seeing now is a direct, like, thorough line through, to the present moment. And everything that we do right now will, we have, like, I think they keep saying like 6 months or something to really, you know, um, kind of like change the course of the future that they are laying out for us. Like, they have a very clear plan, y'all. Like, this is been articulated over and over. They're not even trying to hide it. They have laid out the blueprint, and these data centers are the new incarceration, like surveillance systems, in ways that they have stated clearly. We don't care if you have water. We don't care if it's taking up your most important, valuable land and resources. Like, we need AI. What do we need AI for? We really have no use for AI. It's simply for their, consolidation of wealth and power to, like, put the clamp down once, we inevitably wake up from this nightmare and realize, like, all the lies, and I feel like, October 7th has truly revealed to the world, like, the hypocrisy of the West and the Western order, and so-called, like, international order of, human rights, in ways that there's no going back. The world will never be the same again. And I think, the war in Iran and the resistance has given us a blueprint. And I've, like, almost lost hope completely in the left here in the US and Turtle Island in general. Like, I feel like, we have become so sort of like, we're still so privileged in a way that we're not uncomfortable enough to where we can overcome our differences, or like rise up, and in a really powerful, meaningful way. And so I've kind of attached my horses or whatever to the resistance, and the access from Iran to Hezbollah to Hamas, and the lessons that they've shown us with, like, strategic patience is so beautiful and so valuable. And just the principles and the values that they have displayed. um yeah, I think we have a lot to learn, and that, history will reflect on this moment in ways that will show that it changed the course of history. Like, the US is checked. It's a checkmate. Like, it cannot come back from this. The empire is done. So they're just flailing out in very violent ways that could end humanity if the resistance wasn't wiser and how they respond and react. Like, these guys have nuclear weapons, and they're just waiting. Israel's just waiting and wanting to push more violence and, escalate the situation. Whereas the resistance is truly trying to de-escalate and, show that their power and control, so I feel like the most important thing we can do right now is really just support that, and uplift it, and try to learn from it and connect with it as much as possible.
Could you kind of talk a bit about how the opportunity to go to Palestine manifested, and what that material kind of work looked like, or like share as much as you feel ready to share, but I'm very curious about that.
Well, I had never really heard of like protective presence before I engaged with it, and so when the opportunity presented itself, when in talks that I had with Nora, like she explained to me like what it was, and so I felt like I was already somebody that was like really positioned to um like I don't know, be willing to take those sort of risks. Like I think in the course of my life, like I've found myself in like many situations that like sort of like a very close proximity to like danger and life threatening situations. So it didn't really I tell people like solidarity like has to have like teeth, and so the way that I perceive it is like solidarity has to have this element of like risk. And I think for people like in the West, we have this idea of like our lives have more of like value than other people in the rest of the world. Like we have this level of like comfort that really prevents us from being willing to like take risks because oh, it's like dangerous, oh, it's this, it's that. But like there's people that are living lives every single day that have that risk, and that their lives are always in danger, and they still thrive. They still have this element of humanity that really is unmatched to what we have here in America. And that was something that like I felt like I immediately experienced when as soon as I set foot in Palestine. Like as soon as I like got there, like it was something that was like ambient, the level of like humanity that like people had. And the way that I express is like it was the first time that I felt like fully like human, and it was in spite of the intense repression, and it was in spite of the occupation, and in spite of all these things, like people were still living this fullness, and able to really like make other people feel that. And like and so when I think about like solidarity, I feel like it's getting outside of that zone of like comfort and complacency, and this perspective that like I know that like not everybody's going to be in a position to you know do that sort of thing, but like I feel like that element is like is necessary to know that like it's important and to like support it. And so you know like yeah, when I the opportunity came, like it was like a no-brainer. And so yeah.
And just for people that are going to be listening, could you explain what protective presence is, or what that approach of like direct action or solidarity is?
I think it shows itself in different ways. In this context, the way that it kind of shows up is like internationals being sort of like a buffer in between the settlers and the the people from whatever town you're in. Like it can act as like a like a yeah, like a buffer. And that where the settlers are a little bit like less inclined to you know act as violently as maybe they would have if internationals aren't there. And so just being there, like there's still a great like deal of violence. And I think in recent years, with the escalation of annexation, and we're really seeing like a wild increasing in the violence in the West Bank. But one of the places I was at is a city called Inel Duke, and it's right next to Jericho. And while I was there, like this was a place that was undergoing like numerous settler attacks, and the people of the town like were you know really like fearful because they were being like settlers would come through in trucks and beat people up and severely injure people, damage their property, like solar panels. Like it was like insane just being there, seeing the way that the kids were able to play like a little bit less, like it was sort of like that took a little bit of pressure off they were like happier, they were able to like play, and so that was one of the biggest effects was like just for the people to be able to have a breather while they develop strategies and to for example there was one road to the town that was essentially shared between the people of the community and the settlers, and so it was always like a point of like conflict to where with this one road that was shared, like the settlers were always like harassing the kids and harassing the people in the community. And so during the time that we were there was plans able to be made for another road that was another road to this town, and so just having internationals there, like it gives that a little bit of space. And there's a lot of like debate over the like effectiveness now of protective presence because of the fact that violence has been increasing dramatically. But I still feel like it's important. It's important because the people in the community need to know that people have their back.
Yeah, and it makes a big difference to them to have you there. And yeah, like the first time I went was 2003. That it was like the earlier evolution of this work was more like nonviolent direct action, we called it then. It was like during the time Rachel Corrie was there. She was in Gaza. She was the young girl, young woman that was run over by the bulldozer for trying to protect the doctor's home from being demolished. And she was standing out there with her orange vest and screaming with a bullhorn, and they ran her over and they backed up with a D9 Caterpillar bulldozer and crushed her skull again. And, there was a very active, nonviolent Allah yarhamha. I have to say, Rachel Corrie is a legend and a hero and a martyr for Palestine forever. Oh yeah, that's right. So it's, very valued in, in the West Bank, there was a similar, like movement where every Friday, all the village committees, they would descend to the streets and towns, and it was all the families and children would come out together. Often every week, often weeks they would have like a theme and different, costumes and chants, and, it was very coordinated and beautiful and so cathartic. But over the years, over the decades, that sort of devolved to a point where like 2016 and 18, like those are the years that it kind of all fell apart. There was an infiltrators, like the nonviolent movement was destroyed. All of our leaders had been imprisoned and tortured or killed. And so there was a long lull from that time, and I sort of had been waiting for this call because I've been obsessed with this, like the master plan, they call it. It's literally in black and white. The Zionist state put out called the Master Plan 2020 for Jerusalem. It goes by different names, but you could go like Master Plan 2020, Master Plan for Jerusalem. Basically, that they were going to cut off the north from and connect the settlements to each other through Jerusalem. And so like we may be 6 years behind schedule, but they're very much, like on track to do that. And that's why we're seeing the acceleration and the extreme violence as they attempt to conclude their project. And so like when the genocide began, like it used to be 6 of us planning all the protests and rallies and actions in the Bay. And then, after October 7th, like I would find out about them after they happened, if at all. So I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? Like in all my organizing, I try to find like where the vacuum is, where the needs are. And so plug in that way. And so soon after that, the call came from Palestine, and I was just super excited to see that. And so that was 24. And so, yeah, we started organizing to get folks to go back. And I've been doing that off and on. Like the movement here sort of fell apart, like in terms of bringing internationals. And so when F12 went, they connected with the folks on the ground that are mostly like Italians and Europeans. Because here in Turtle Island, again, we are very far behind in our work and our organizing. And so we're trying to pick up the pieces and sort of rebuild. And so we're trying to get folks to go back, and we're sort of like trying to create a newer structure that isn't just about like putting our bodies as buffers, and that we're finding additional ways for people to contribute and be in solidarity in ways that they feel like they can contribute, whether they're artists or teachers or there's coders, like techies that are interested, that we're talking about doing like a coding camp, like a techie camp in the West Bank. So we'll be following up on that in the coming months. And then to the olive harvest, which is happening in October, which is the most beautiful time to be in Palestine. And if anyone is at all able or interested, I highly recommend, like, yeah, just reaching out. Please do connect, because it is an unforgettable experience, and as everyone says, life-changing experience. And once you go, it's like you just fall in love with the people and the land, and it creates these relationships that are like really beautiful to develop.
What sort of traps do you see activists get caught in when thinking about traveling for solidarity work and solidarity organizing?
I mean, I think the obvious one is like white saviorism, right? Like, we stopped using protective presence as much anymore, because like our presence isn't going to protect them, the people, any like the settlers no longer care about international as much as they used to. Like it used to be a big deterrent, but now with the like increased like escalation of violence and lack of complete impunity for any accountability, they realize they can continue to escalate their violence and do so. It may slow things down a little bit, but I think, just to think like humbly and just to do like decolonial work, like the internal work that's needed, is really important. Because like as Westerners, we come and we have this privilege, and that's part of what shields us, and our passports and stuff. But with that comes like an entitlement, and like more subtly, I think, that's like the extreme version of it, but like on a personal level, I've seen over the past 3 years, like all these new people pouring into the movement, and like everyone wants to save Palestine. Everyone wants to free Palestine by themselves, and so like people are all trying to take credit like for this or that. And, it's just the hardest thing to witness, because it just creates this, like Superman like mindset that is so misguided, I feel like, because you know we need to learn how to be collective, like in our work, in our thinking, in our just community, like building efforts. Like I feel like that is the most important thing we can do right now, and to heal these relationships in ways that are like very grounded in, self-awareness and, decolonial practices, and really just the inner work that is revolutionary and liberatory in ways that isn't just, for our own self-healing and personal growth, but for the collective.
And a lot of that, I feel like a lot of the deeper work starts like when you come back, like how you have that paradigm shift, in your analysis and how you apply that to, the context of your own community. And I think um, a lot of like people that haven't had that experience or maybe are like new to it, like can kind of view any like group of people like outside the West or like that are fighting oppression somewhere else. Like there's I feel like there's a big thing of like viewing Palestinians like as a monolith, like like as if all like Palestinians are the same. And that is something that is obviously like not true. Like no group of people is a monolith. And seeing the differences from city to city, town to town, to community to community, like it really it's an example of like like the same thing that is over here, like just different people, different perspectives, different opinions, different like um modes of this and that. And I think that is probably one of the biggest things that can like shift the way that people think about resistance and think about like the context of how to like organize is not viewing other objectification of people, and really taking the time to like understand like the history and the culture, like when their organizing efforts aren't applied in a way that's like surface level, and you can get to like the depth of understanding of how to engage with a struggle that's not your own.
In Ohio, there is a lot of like solidarity and anti-war and genocide efforts happening. And I remember, from my perspective, a lot of what I struggled with was some of the local privilege among some of the Palestinian American folks and how that shifted and swayed the movement, and how for a lot of people it was hard to push back because that was like a certain contextual thing. And then I think about like as you were talking, I wrote like turning away from like the dehumanizing romanticism of solidarity, if I'm thinking of like another way to think about it. And I'm thinking about like particularly like some of my experiences doing like border solidarity work, and how like showing up, hiking into the desert, being at camps, talking to people, cleaning out toilets, cleaning out like trash out of tents and other things, and how some of or a lot of solidarity work, to me, the meaningful stuff is like slow and humble. It takes time. You actually have to, like you're saying, get to know people across like diasporic differences. And I feel like maybe some of the failures of the romanticism is like people buy into it because it helps them feel more noble in the work that they're doing, as opposed to maybe having critiques like within reason and within understanding, actually taking the time to engage and understand, and having it not be some easy prepackaged kind of series of lessons you're walking away with. It's like one way I think of it.
Right. And then, yeah, like if you're upholding someone's like humanity up here and like having this romantic version of them, and then when, the reality sets in and, like there's, like issues and people are like, oh, but you said you were going to be here at, this time and where are you? And, or there, what's the structure? We need to know what the plan is. I always tell people like, you need to just let go of all expectations, and the more adaptable and flexible that you are with your like willingness to like adapt in the moment is like probably the most important trait I would say that there is to do this work, because you can't plan an hour ahead pretty much there. It's basically just like fly by the seat of your pants, and you have to follow the lead of the people there, and so you can't be like upset when things don't go as planned, plans. Oh yeah, no one's in control there.
Right. That was the one thing that, like, I experienced that, I think just based on like, things I experienced, like, incarceration, just with the element of like not being able to plan. You don't know what's going to happen an hour from now because you don't have that control over your environment, your situation, and like the ways that reflected just like the ways the institution controls people, being in Palestine, like just like the checkpoints, and not knowing if you're like, maybe you have to go somewhere that's like, in reality it's like 10 minutes away, 30-minute drive maybe, but it's going to take like 3 hours to get there. And then you don't even know if you're going to make it, because you get to a checkpoint and maybe you get searched, and they just tell you to turn around. And so not being able to like plan is like, something that I start to understand, like this element of like temporal oppression, and like the ways that the occupation really like constructs like this element of like, not where people aren't able to like plan for their own future, because of the checkpoints, and this and that, and like and then also on the idea of like adaptability, like in terms of work, like yeah, like not being able to, for me, not being able to speak the language, and like a lot of times just being able to like trust the people that I was there with, like because you can't, it's not like you can ask a ton of questions, like just be able to trust the situation and know that like you're there with like good people. A lot of times I would like get in the car with somebody, and we would just go, and just being able to trust, like, okay, this is the comrade, we're going somewhere where it's good at. And so like that for me, like was is like important, like you have that element of trust, and that like the people that you're there on the ground with, like like really that you can trust them.
I was going to say, what is it like to travel as a like decolonial organizer and activist and engage in a cause so heavily based in land struggles? How does that impact organizing there, and like your impact organizing here on Turtle Island as well? Because one thing I'm always trying to think of how to replicate is how there were so many educational pop-ups that happened during the students' occupations that were teaching history about Palestine and settler colonialism. Like really a lot of folks navigating these things that, like you were saying, like a lot of folks didn't think we'd get this folks and folks talking about Palestine so much 10 years ago now, like talking about settler colonialism as well, like on Turtle Island now, is something that I never 10 years ago would not think that we'd see on like the decolonial left. Like it wasn't as much of an informed topic in conversation. I'm curious how.
I think that one of the things that sort of I notice is the disconnect, when people have their understanding of the decolonization, and that's necessary in Palestine, and then not being able to connect it to here, not seeing the decolonial struggle, like in terms of like Turtle Island, having this decolonial analysis for everywhere but here. That was one of the disconnects. Like I would see that a lot, like when in terms of how people would engage with like electoralism. I was in proximity to like, would help. I think that at the same time, like, I could kind of see that, like, okay, this is, I would have this critique for somewhere else, but like the ways that like people like engage with it here, it should also be applied in the same way, you know, because the parallels are pretty like spot on. So when people talk about, you know, like land struggles and you know, there's always that disconnect, because, you know, Turtle Island it's the same context. And a lot of times the history is not even that. It's not like it's that long ago. You know, there's still like, as of recently, like the schools that you know, they used to put indigenous children in, those like kind of just like shut down like rather recently, you know. And so, you know, this is a place that has a you know, pretty deep history of colonization and the effects that's had on the communities here, but yet we're still seeing that people aren't able to like have that same analysis that they have for other places.
This is again where we were talking earlier about how past and present are colliding in such like tangible ways. I feel like because of the historical context of our, colonial past and genocidal past and slavery past has never been fully resolved, that we continue to grapple with it in ways that are continuing to emerge and define the contradictions in really clear ways. And the challenge upon us is truly to like, put a wedge in those cracks and like try to pry it open and just continue to expose it. For example, like, the US is never been a democracy, really representative. It has never been, it is like based on a economy that is a Ponzi scheme. Like it is literally not worth the money that it's printed on, the paper that it's printed on. And yet the only thing upholding it is our faith and belief in it, and to me, that speaks volumes like about our role and complicity in it all. And so, yeah, just like that veil that was lifted on October 7th is, really revealing the like the ugly pedophile, like cannibal eating, children eating, state that has ruled over us ever since those times. Like, and yeah, just in terms of like the way the Ponzi scheme stays up right now is through like taking money from the Gulf states, and this artificially inflated AI bubble, and all this brouhaha over the surveillance state. I mean the data centers, as if that is going to continue to uphold the economy and bring jobs, or like they're basically kicking the can down the road as long as they can while grabbing as much as they can on their way down. And until we like refuse to participate and build our parallel systems, I keep joking, like, I wish China would occupy us until we get land back. And like, that's the biggest hope we have right now is like outside of here, because like I feel like the the brain fog, like they're poisoning our water, our air, our food in ways that I just don't see how we're gonna come up for air in a really meaningful way to be able to like be clear enough about making those connections and really like confidently deciding we will no longer participate in this farce any longer. Um, it just kind of refines, like sharpens my analysis when I'm there, like in black and white. Like it just is such a clear picture of what's to come when I look around in those checkpoints and like all the soldiers and military towers. Like that's what's coming for us next. Everything that's been done in Palestine, all the weapons have been tested there. It's all coming for us next. I mean, they're literally using the same weapons manufacturers, whether it's Elbit Systems or, the multitude of drone companies and military contractors. here in the belly button of the belly of the beast, where I stand, sit here today in Silicon Valley. Like all these tech bros, they're literally trying to privatize the government so that they can take the land over our, like, like the people's having access to them. So this struggle is very much still alive as and well as it was, hundreds of years ago, 250 years ago to be exact. And truly the only hope I believe we have right now is a revolution, and like all of us coming together and just like overcoming our differences, or just hoping that the resistance will do that for us.
I love this question, Jordan. I almost want to, what thoughts do you have? I mean, you kind of shared some of the context for that question, but are there things that come to mind for you too, Jordan, in terms of thinking about this question? And I mean, I definitely view you as someone that cares a lot about like actionable and long-term solidarity, but like what comes to mind for you when you think about this?
I mean, to me, I think we circle around like the three major points for, I think, like actionable decolonization, which is land back, reparations, and like an intense look at what justice means. So like police and prison abolition here locally, but also like what does reconciliation look like, and is that a part of like the reparations process in and of itself? And I feel like those those two works alongside like being able to, one, have a documentation, but also sustain material and communication networks with impacted people and people who are impacted by violence and surviving it, and helping us overcome and meet those needs directly. It kind of gets me into my next question a bit, unless Prentice, you had more to say.
Um, I feel like I'm just kind of resonating with a lot of what y'all are saying. Like, I think about like the last presidential election here and how like the whole uncommitted movement materialized. And for me as a media maker, what I struggled with, especially talking to other Black people, was like, we got to vote for Kamala. It's our only hope. It's the only way forward. And I'm just like, you can't like imagine or even talk about another possibility. And that's just like the lowest hanging fruit in my mind. Like, on the path towards ungovernability, abolition, reparations, like decolonization. And so, I mean, I guess when I think about like Turtle Island and our relationality to all these different forms of decolonization, I'm just like, how do we even get to the point where people don't accept, one, the political process is given to them, but then also the forms of punishment like offered as well? Because like I think about like 2020 and experiencing like the various National Guard coming into different cities, and then now ICE coming into various cities around the US, and how, at least in terms of my life on like the land of Turtle Island, and how like those parallels are there, but what does it take for people not to participate in the colonial project? And why do people romanticize another like form of resistance, as we're kind of talking about, but not see their lives as a part of that struggle? Especially to your point about like what do people do when they come back from these experiences, like doing protective presence or engaging in other forms of solidarity? Like, how does that actually live? And it's not just a one-time experience or realization. Like, I guess I think of that on like an emotional and a political level.
You know, to what you're saying, like there's a like aspect where they keep us in this cycle, of like, giving us, this option, and to make people feel like, well, this is our only option. And it feels like that's how they keep us, like, that belief in it, like where we're like, okay, things are really bad, but we got this route we can take, and if we take this route, then things won't be as bad. It'll mitigate this and mitigate that, and that is like that's the tactic. That's how they keep us, like, our the whatever remaining faith that we have. That's how they keep it. And we see that, the way that shows up is like they're gonna put somebody, in office, or somebody is running for a position, and we, like, representation isn't the same as revolution. Like we see that, like, they put a Muslim on the ballot, a black person, a woman, and we see this, element of representation, as if, that is our pathway out of this hellhole, and it never is, and it never will be, because that pathway, it leads, it's empirical, that pathway is to the empire. And regardless of, the rhetoric that I feel like the person carries, they still are operating in this capacity that is beneficial for the empire. And that is exactly how movements get like co-opted. That's how, we are seeing, like, everything become, like, our demands become, like, lessened and lessened, and we become more, like, willing to accept this and that, and instead of, Cop City will never be built, it's like, well, we'll let you build it, but, we're not going to accept this. And so, we see this, it starts off with, like, a shift in demands. Things start to, like, slowly get away from, the radical positions that they're initially built on, towards, the least, like, just accepting whatever we're given. And I think that the empire is so good at doing this. Like, like, obviously with Obama, and we see that, like, with Mamdani, and like every time it happens, I always feel like, okay, this is going to be the last time, like, people are going to be fed up. Like, this is it. People are like, this has got to be the time where people recognize, like, okay, this, like, just because they put, somebody in office that looks just like you, doesn't mean anything's going to change. And every time, like, we're kind of, like, let down. And then when
it's only been happening for like 50 years,
right? It's
we've only
that's
been
it.
allowed to let that happen for like 50 years. Like, that's barely
Right,
two generations,
right,
like,
exactly.
We're still learning.
I mean, I thought in
Right.
2003, once people saw Palestinians getting bulldozed in their homes, like, because they're too old or sick and they couldn't escape, like, I'm like, oh, that's it. The world is going to see what Israel really is, and they're going to stop them now. And then, like, 2009, they were, like, shooting white phosphorus on TV. Like, it was widely known, and it was just like, okay, the truth has kind of come out now. Like, this is it. This is our moment. And then, so it was like the opposite side of the coin. It was like the violence of the empire, like, is being revealed in, parallel to, like, the brownest, president in power, like, in history, like, doing it. And still, like, they keep escalating their impunity. And with that, they know that they can get away with more and more. It's like the boiling frog inside the pot, and then they never jump out because they don't even know that they're oppressed and that they're part of this.
I feel like they're testing, like, how much we will consent to, essentially, and they know, like, they've realized at this point they can get away with everything, because they've already put, a black president in power that really did, he was bombing the hell out of everyone. And since, they've already, that baseline was already established, they already know that, like, what they can do, and what we will consent to. And so, yeah, it just
They just
really,
keep
like,
doubling down. Yeah.
they just keep doubling down. It's like, kind of like, I don't know.
But also,
Like-
like
depressing.
Nora was saying, this is a white republic. This has always been a white republic, and this isn't a democracy. Like,
They're not
it's
even trying to
always-
hide it. Yeah.
Yeah, we are the machinery of our military that really owns all the political machinery around
That's it.
around all of our elections is going to continue to, like,
If we even
give
have
itself-
elections, you know.
it's always going to look like an election because that's the American way. The American way is that it's going to look like an election.
I mean, we're getting to a point now. They're talking about canceling like the
Yeah.
So none of that is guaranteed. And like our political leadership, I don't know if you know Cooperation Jackson, and like folks have been sounding this alarm for decades that they're going to do away with even the illusion of democracy for a very long time. Right? You know, now it's finally, it's coming. They're talking about canceling the midterms even. So it's not a far distant future that, you know they can literally, and I was just thinking how like in 2008 the Ponzi scheme, like, it was all revealed in broad daylight, like the largest heist in the history of, the country at that point was done in broad daylight. And like the same so-called leftists were saying, oh, just elect Obama, and too big to fail, the banks are too big to fail. And I was just like, how is this okay? And COVID, the amount of wealth that the oligarchs amassed during COVID is like, I heard, over double or triple what they, consolidated during the 2008 crisis. So it's kind of a wrap. Like at this point, they have all the wealth that, they've taken away from the bottom, like 80%. And it's literally just at this point, they're playing in our faces and they don't even care. They're not trying to hide it because there's literally nothing we can do outside of just, quit believing in their system and build a parallel system alongside of it. But of course, that would require not participating in the farce of the illusion of their project.
There's a good amount of will and potential in a non-cooperation movement and in building these actual alternative systems and seeing them through. And hopefully that gets prioritized a lot more. I'm curious what kind of alternative systems and like other, even like decolonial economic things you've seen while in Palestine. You mentioned like the olive tree harvest is something that's very important. Can you kind of explain some of that system and or what other alternative systems that you've seen?
Well, as far as like systems, I think like one of the like biggest like sort of like contrast to people's like day-to-day lives, like I experienced like in I know Duke, where is essentially essentially they grow all their own stuff, and a very like a community that was very like subsistent on like the land, and very like rooted in like the just the land, and so like as far as like systems, that was different from other places that I went to.
Palestine, they have had to create, alternatives out of nothing, literally, because they've had no choice. And the creativity that has emerged from like barter systems or just, cooperation in ways that, they've always shared and lived on the land. That's of course being threatened in so many ways. Like that is the number one goal of the project of the occupation, is to undermine, the self-sustaining nature of Palestinian communities and societies. Like they're very agricultural and like,
Right, agriculture.
living
That's the
off the
word I was looking
land.
for.
Yeah, so it's very much based in like indigenous practices. And like I often think like we don't need to invent a parallel system necessarily. Like we just need to look to our ancestors, like our indigenous ancestors, especially here on Turtle Island, and like follow their lead. They already are coexisting with the land, and same is true in Palestine, is just like remove the boot from their neck and allow them to show us the way forward, and like lead by example. Yeah, and just like in the meantime, like a lot of the amazing work that people are doing around mutual aid has been really inspiring. I've learned a lot from, and also like fundraising to give. Like I haven't been a big part of that movement, because I feel like that's most, normies or whatever do, is like raise money to give and to send back, like especially to Gaza. But one of the reasons I got involved with the West Bank is because like the majority of the focus is in on Gaza, where, and understandably so, but like in the meantime, the West Bank is burning literally, and that's been always been their goal, is to take that over. So really just like, yeah, trying to support all that we can to help them sustain staying and living and being on the land. And one of the groups that we're working with is called Pal Shield, and it's like a form of like self-defense, and like to be able to build mechanisms in place to where we can be more proactive, and have like fire extinguishers and alarm systems, and build fences to try to like ward off the enemy, and trying to like sort of put a barrier around so that they can continue to survive and live, because it is really just survival. So it's hard to look to that to build the alternative, because they're practicing it in ways that are without having they wouldn't have survived thus far. But it needs to be like, yeah, obviously supported and uplifted, and yeah, implemented more broadly here. I feel like where the policies, as they say, are the kitchen is that they're put the ingredients in to cook up for the rest of the world.
Oh, I was gonna say, like when we talk about like what systems and alternatives that we could build here, one of the things that like I'm sort of like dealing with or rectifying is like, and this probably is like a huge conversation, but the ways that, and this is probably an Afro-pessimist like analysis, but the ways that like I see anti-Blackness reproduce itself in the movement spaces, in these spaces where we want to build these like alternative systems, and like how to like get around that, or how to like get through that, or get like, that is something that like is a constant, like, like a constant like thing, and to like convey to people, because it always feel like it's something that is so like ambient, and I think it happens, like you see it more in communities that like have this, I guess, like illusion of diversity, because it a lot of times those places can wear that diversity like a badge, and with that badge, like like comes this this like this this like illusion of like radicalism. But a lot of times it's just this past for like the way that anti-Blackness like is operating. It's something that, since we've seen this like influx of organizing and like engagement in and activism since October 7th, dramatically like increased, and the ways that it shows up are so much more like insidious, while not being like, the thing that I feel like is just like, that sucks, is when people like recognize it and experience it, but they don't have the words to describe it. They can feel it and know it's happening, but like not being able to like have either the like the, sort of like the vocabulary to express what's happening, and then it gets filtered into all these other things and identified by all these other things, ways that are not what's happening, and it can come off as like either like divisiveness, or just this, or just that. But like the root of radicalism is not an aesthetic. And a lot of times in certain movement spaces, it shows itself as simply like an aesthetic, when the principles themselves are not actually like rooted in nothing except for empty rhetoric. When I think about what it takes to like build these alternative systems to become ungovernable, I'm like, well, if you're not getting past that, if you can't get over that, mountain, like what can be built except for a replication of something that's already happening. And so that it seems to me like something that is gonna be, something to like address, because like I have seen it, experienced it, and now I know that like I've seen this experience shared by numerous other Black organizers everywhere, where they're seeing like these things, having this similar experience. I think it all when you put the proper lens on it, like it becomes evident. But like that lens is something that uh, a lot of people just are simply not ready for, this idea that nobody else has any type of like concrete form without this without the perception that like you're only human because of where like Black people aren't human, because that's the ways that the relational thing that happens, like the between the human and the slave, like the human and the non-human, like giving, like Black people give form to everything else. This is like like a Afro-pessimist analysis, but something that is like at the heart of radicalism to build these new systems. Like it's something that is, people are going to run into this like eventually.
Sounds like, yeah, it all comes back to doing the internal work, like, but at the same time, not letting that impede or stop you from doing the outside work too.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I really resonate with what you're saying in a lot of ways, because basically in Ohio, like there was all this stuff happening around solidarity, and basically eventually I had to get kicked out of a meeting because maybe some of the things that you're saying, like people not being willing to self-critique, and I take some of what you're saying as like, if people are trying to be in solidarity, but they still aren't willing to question their proximity to like white supremacy or colonization or being governable, among other things, like when those other isms and like the anti-Blackness comes up on like an interpersonal level, like how can people like go past the optics or the aesthetics of like the kind of resistance they're trying to put up versus the longer, more humble, critical work, debriefing, sitting down, getting feedback, actually like course correcting, and I don't know, and figuring out how to humble yourself so you can show up better and better next time, or like just listening when people offer like valid critique and are telling you that you fucked up, is like one way that I take what you're saying.
I feel like some of that, all that relation is everyone understanding how we handle fear and grief, and doing that internal and external healing work is a part of fighting for any justice, and it's kind of the glue that holds a lot of it together. And it's not even that everyone's a part of everyone's healing process. It's that there's space for that collective conversation to happen so that people can take them to their collective, other more personal collective healing spaces, or like internal healing spaces. But not having that movement healing space at all is very damaging, because I think, and like having that space to be able to translate what healing looks like for other people, and being able to have that may just be what the collective process is figuring out what handling that fear and grief looks like for each other, especially depending on the types of risks that you're engaging with people from any range of things. I think it's very vital for those sorts of situations. And it's a practice in communication as well. Like doing, especially in international solidarity work, diaspora work, what does the repression look like from the various states who don't want to see liberation in our communities? And what does the care work for each other look like for y'all? How are you staying sane?
That is a big assumption.
Yes. I believe. Well, I yes. On the topic of sanity, I believe sanity is out the window. It is so much, like non-existent for a lot of people that get into the depth and the meat of this organizing and solidarity work, whatever. Like when you get real deep into it, like it comes with a suitcase full of trauma, and it is something that it's going to test you, and like there's I feel like it comes with these periods, moments, these phases of like deep grief, and it's gonna you have that like internal reflection. You're gonna question everything about yourself. You're gonna question everything about what community means, what your purpose is. But like it's sort of a necessary reflection. It's that process of like like humility, and it's a process of like where it shapes your path moving forward. And so you reach a point of like insanity, and that and the thing is like it can like really it's very jarring. But when you apply an analysis to it, you learn that insanity is something to be harnessed, and not like because of the ways that the colonial blueprints on mental health and wellness and all that, like, and what it means to be healthy and sane, like are very like it's very bullshit. Because if you're operating normally in this society, then something's wrong. And so to reach that, and to reach that understanding and to fully grasp it, you learn how to harness like the fact that like you're not going to be okay. And so moving forward, it's gonna really affect the ways that you interact with people, the way that you engage, and you feel like it inspires a lot of like I think care, and because you start to see this reflection of maybe your own experiences in other people, and not wanting to see other people go through or experience the things that maybe you have went through, or you've seen somebody else go through. And I believe that's one of the like at the heart of like abolition is knowing that you have to build this, in addition to this aspect of destroying the world that we live in, and tearing everything down. There's building something new that's built on like care and community, and actually giving a real fuck about people and what they go through. And so in order to get to that point where you're able to like like show up in that way, like you have to go through this period of like insanity, and like where you are able to like harness your own trauma and the things that you essentially had to go through in order to like show up in the world in that way.
Yeah, I always say like you have to be a little insane to stay sane in this world, in this context, in this culture. But with that said, like I feel like all the regular things that we should be doing, whatever, like meditation, being in nature, exercise, those are really important. But also like what gives me life is organizing. Like that feeds my soul in ways that like truly I feel like is when you create something out of nothing, where nothing existed before, to create this new thing is very, very like rewarding and fulfilling. But also like I've been like I was saying, like getting a PhD in YouTubeology, like political analysis, because like there's so much amazing analysis out there right now that if you just go out there and see like people that you resonate with and learn from, and then get more ideas or suggestions from the algorithm or whatever, and just like feed your brain to try to understand what's happening in this moment. And literally, if one thing I could say is just that like everything is connected, and we cannot fight these systems until we see how all those dots connect, and until we do. It's just like not in just like the spiritual, we are all one kind of way that like I believe we are, but like in very tangible, tactical ways. These people have names, they have faces, they have companies, and those are very vulnerable. We need to go after them in very clear ways, and just be strategic about it. And yeah, just connect more with like-minded folks. Like when people come together and they are, like we need to have more grace with folks, like, and people make mistakes, and we can't just be, like kicking them out of meetings or organizing spaces. I've seen more of that of the past 3 years than I've seen in 25 years of organizing, and that's just shocking, honestly. And it's not right, and I think we need to do better, and like maybe build in those practices, restorative or transformative justice practices within our movement spaces, so that we're prepared to deal with that harm when it does come up, which it inevitably will. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, I've seen the death knell of many of organization when they try to make the accountability process right when they need it in crisis. And I mean, as we know, I think for any organizing thing in general, like being the most prepared is what's going to lead to the most amount of success. And being ready isn't like a state of being, but just a decision that we make, and that a decision we have to make when it confronts us. Prince, did you have words?
No, no. I was just thinking this is probably one of my favorite interviews we've ever done. So,
Aww.
yeah.
So enjoyable here. Likewise. Thank you.
Quick shotgun round, last question, bit goofy. $3 million, 1 weekend, what are you going to do? But I honestly had nothing to do. I just wanted to be nice and not make you guys on the top. But you had something. You were ready. You go.
I'm always scheming and dreaming. My latest dream has been to surround the entire all of historic Palestine by land and by sea. And so like I'm just envisioning and dreaming that up. So I would like fly a bunch of people to Jordan, to Egypt, and like unleash them, have this whole thing mapped out, and like, by sea. And yeah, just like I think that is the only way that we just need to overpower and overwhelm them, like physically, like, peacefully, ideally, non-violently, so that, we come together, we show our humanity. I mean, literally everyone sees Israel is at the cause, or I should say the Zionist entity, is at the root cause of the majority of the world's problems. I mean, capitalism in general, we can't decouple that from Zionism. And yeah, just like we are many, they are few. And until and unless we get it together to overcome our differences and literally gather around and surround those that are causing harm, they're going to continue to do it with impunity. And we see that those that are so-called elected leaders that are, responsible for taking action failed us on every level, and we can no longer count on them, and it is only us that is coming to save us, and we are that what keep us safe. So yeah, I just dream of that day someday to come true.
I would probably like buy a few like my homies like freedom, or like good lawyers, you know what I'm saying, like try to get them out of like prison, something like that, like get some good attorneys for some homies, and try to get some folks out of prison, or something like that.
Yeah, it's real as fuck. I'm torn. I was torn between like free the homies, giving it to like some like the Land Back Action Network folks, or like really starting some like cooperative banks, like some credit unions, but like by neighborhood. But I'm like, I only have a weekend, so I think it's money for the homies, or I'm just throwing it all to the land back.
Right.
Yeah.
You know?
Like, I got $1 million to put on your books. Yeah.
I know. I'm like 1.5 to 1.5. Let's do it.
Oh, such a hard question. I'm like, one weekend, what am I gonna do? I mean, I guess I immediately thought like get my mom a house or like a nicer house, or like a house big enough for my family. Definitely funnel a lot of money to the underground, get people resources so they can do the things they need to do that they gotta do. And then right after college, I had this idea of like trying to do this like traveling van library political education project where we'd like park outside of high schools and hand out literature and things like that. And I feel like something like that would be really cool to kind of like get off the ground on like a larger scale, like in different ways, different places. Yeah.
I grew up in Castro Valley, and my little white friends used to say that that's what the KKK did off of campus, is hand
Oh.
out their little flyers.
Yeah. Passing out
I never
zines.
experienced that, but that's the flip side. So
Now they
Bring it back
do.
for good. For good.
yes,
Yeah.
There's the KKK here puts like their zines in a bag and then a rock in the bag, and then they throw it at your door so that they can like be in their cars and just throwing them like mail people.
Wow.
wow.
It's a brilliant
Damn.
tactic. It's a brilliant tactic.
Brilliant.
At least they don't step out. They know they got to keep it moving, otherwise they
Yeah,
may not
yeah.
last
In
long.
the dead of fucking night, people
But
wake up.
Ohio, isn't Les Wexner from Ohio? Like,
Yeah,
it's crazy out there.
that's our boy.
They're
That's our boy.
privatizing everything in Ohio. They're
Yeah,
trying
they
to
call
take
it
over.
Silicon Valley.
Wow. Yeah, that's the next one. Why the corn?
Where we produce a lot of the
Oh, really?
nation's corn
Oh, wow.
and soybeans.
Silicorn. Oh, wow.
For a lot of oil. And now they're using a lot of that open corn farmland to make data centers and
Right.
drone
And
facilities.
taking over the government. They're literally like taking over the government, the techies, I heard.
They already had our government there, you know.
Wow. That's what they're trying to replicate in the rest of the country. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like us in
Ohio.
Texas.
Yep.
Fucking, they just
Ohio and
released
Texas.
the tax exchange, or the new stock exchange just opened up in Dallas,
Oh, wow.
Texas. Is like now we have like the New York Stock Exchange, just a private bunch of entities that trade stocks and like are like people who do that. So now they have a new one in Texas.
Yikes. Like, those are the child trafficking centers too. That's the last thing I will say, is just
Yep,
like,
Texas,
that's
Ohio,
where
Florida.
yeah, and that's how they launder the money, is through those banks and, stock exchange, like equity, private equity, like all these legit businesses. There's 50 million people that get trafficked every year, and it's a $300 to $400 billion industry, and it's the largest growing industry, and I think like it's only going to grow while they steal all of our resources and AI takes our jobs. Like, that is their goal, is to make us all their slaves, labor slaves, sex slaves, whatever they need. So yeah, this is a really important moment, and we have to stop them.
And thank you guys so much for coming on. Is there any last words you want to do? How do folks reach out and plug in?
Oh, Feza, Pal, FAZ, 3A_Pal on Instagram. And then my Instagram is just Bint_Palestine, FULESTEEN. And what's your Instagram?
Mine's is Toussaint F12. TOUSSAINT F12, and you can also find me on Substack, where I write seditious stuff. And yeah.
I think this is a wonderful introduction for folks. And yeah, would definitely love to have y'all back on because we didn't really talk much about FASA and the work that y'all actually do on the ground. Just a lot of
Wonderful. We would love to come back because we're also in the process of developing the program for the olive harvest as well as like a parallel program. So hopefully we'll have a lot more of that stuff, kind of solidified. Next time we'd love to come back. So thank you so much for having us. It was wonderful to meet you
Yes,
both.
of course, of course.